And as Dennis and I can attest, we really only have one president at a time. The Trump administration violated that flagrantly during the transition to some very detrimental effects. But I think we absolutely need to honor it because it's the only way our government can function responsibly. As we know it from our experience at the end of the Obama administration, in the entirety of the national security apparatus, the only meetings that occurred of any substance between counterparts were between me and incoming National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, not at Defense, not at State, not the other critical agencies. And you can imagine the kind of deficit that leaves an incoming administration with if they're serious about trying to govern. And I can't tell you how frustrated members of Congress are with how things are operating or failing to operate here in Washington. I spent some time up last week with the Democratic caucus, and there is this pent-up fury that their role as the Article I branch has been completely disregarded. And of course, Iran is, and the lack of consultation, the lack of information, the lack of transparency is just the most proximate example. But whoever comes after that is going to have to deal with that fury. It's not going away. And that means, when you're competing with a China that puts every aspect of its hugely powerful government and society behind any economic endeavor, and we can't get Google to cooperate with the U.S. government on a small, low-level project Maven, we've got a problem because we can't reconstitute very easily the cooperation between government, the private sector, and our universities that were so instrumental in enabling us to be effective during the Cold War. And you know what? When Donald Trump, I'm looking for the polite word. I won't be that polite. When he craps on people,
that's
constantly
PG-13.
In the agencies and individually and collectively, those chickens are going to come home to roost, and I think they're starting to now.
Yeah, there's been a parade of them.
So all hail our career civil servants and foreign service officers.
You have a chapter in your book called The Fourth Quarter, which is about the last 2-year period of the Obama administration, which really was a tremendous period of accomplishment in foreign policy.
Well, I think the things that we were able to get done in that window included the Iran deal, the Paris Climate Agreement, the opening to and normalization with Cuba, putting ISIS on the path to defeat. And so that's both, encouraging and discouraging. But what it does mean is that, with new leadership, we have the wherewithal to build on some of these important accomplishments of the latter part of the Obama administration. Some will be harder to repair than others. I think the Iran deal is going to be very, very difficult to retrieve, if not impossible. I think Paris is not going to be that hard. I don't think Cuba will be that hard. And now ISIS has been totally undone.
When I think about Benghazi now, sitting where we are today in American history, it really sort of was the conspiracy in the coal mine for what was to come in American politics. Because it was, to me, the first time that a conspiracy theory devoid of any facts exploded on the far right dark corners of the internet, and then before too long it became the official policy of the Republican Party.
It was a pivot point and maybe a harbinger of how dishonest and destructive our political battles could become. And so in the moment, it all feels like, oh my God, this is, horrible and it can't get worse. Well, it's gotten so much worse. The dishonest politics of personal and collective destruction that we've seen today. And the classic example is Trump's effort to try to portray Joe Biden, of all people, as corrupt. You know, if that's not the pot calling the kettle black, I don't know what is. And it's also a myth made out of whole cloth. And yet, you know, that's how we play politics now. So at least, you know, in 2012, there was a legitimate crisis. We lost 4 Americans in a horrific terrorist attack. And that was a real tragedy to reckon with. And my part of it was what I was told to say on 5 Sunday shows based on what was our current best understanding of what had happened. And 10 days later and beyond, we got new information that made what I had shared inaccurate in at least one important respect. And that resulted in me being branded in perpetuity a liar, incompetent, untrustworthy. And of course, you know, my incompetence was it's the extent to which I agreed to be the face that went out on those shows and do so in the hothouse of a crisis. I took one for the team, and I didn't expect in making that, agreeing to go on, that would be the case, but I probably should have in retrospect. And that's one of the things I write about in the book, you know, what I learned from this experience, both about myself, where I made mistakes. I didn't listen to my mother, who, no, seriously, she warned me on that Friday night before I went on Sunday, don't go on the shows. She had just had a stroke following her 4th or 5th cancer surgery, and I had stopped by her house on the way home from work just to spend some time with her and see how things were going. And she said, so what are you doing this weekend? And I said, well, I'm taking the kids on Saturday to the Ohio State football game. They're going to play Berkeley. So that was my plan for the weekend. And then I said, but I've also just been asked to go on the Sunday shows, so I'll do that as well. And she's like, why? Why are you being asked to go on the Sunday shows? And she went through this whole thing about, don't do it, I smell a rat. And I was like, Mom, don't be ridiculous. I've done this before, you know, it's not what I wanted to do, but I agreed to do it. It'll be fine. And of course it wasn't. Lesson number 2, which I also write about in the book, is when crazy is happening to somebody in your family or close to you, turn off the television. My mom could not bring herself to turn off the television, so she was tortured by what was happening to me. And worse, my 9-year-old daughter, who we weren't even conscious about, you know, overhearing what was coming through on the television, ended up having a series of pretty scary hallucinations that we couldn't explain. And out of the blue, sort of, you know, 6 weeks into all of this, she was saying that she was seeing images of men coming at her out of walls. And we were terrified, so we took her to Children's Hospital in Washington, and for 2 weeks they were trying to test her to see, is this possibly a brain tumor? And concluded ultimately that it was a stress reaction to what was happening to me. And after a period of almost a year, it went away. Good news is she's happy, healthy, thriving, almost 17-year-old now. The reason I write about this very personally is because I want people to understand that the politics of personal destruction don't come for free. Real people who didn't sign up for this, as I did, get hurt along the way.
When Trump brought you up again in the beginning of the presidency by saying you were accused of unmasking the Trump officials.
He called me a criminal.
A criminal, yes. I mean, he barely made
I feel really kind of proud to be one of the early,
yes.
Yeah. The early targets of his ire. It's like, you know, it's good company.
It's something to be proud of.
I got it, yeah.
But the minute you had just left the Obama administration, I assume you were vacationing or planning a vacation or relaxing, and all of a sudden, the president of the United States brought you right back in the center of the craziness. What was like? What was your reaction to that? And how did that manifest itself in your life? Did you start hearing from lots of people? Did you feel threatened?
So shock was my first reaction. Then I got angry, and then I, began to apply, frankly, some of the lessons that I had learned the hard way through Benghazi, which was to get out quickly, speak for myself, push back forcefully, and enlist others to do the same. And so my counterpunch this time was far more effective. In the administration, my hands were tied. I mean, I really couldn't. I couldn't counterpunch. I couldn't, call up journalists and say, this is crazy, and here's the facts versus, these completely unsubstantiated allegations. And so, and because it was so baseless, it didn't last long. And he moved on to other villains like James Comey and, more juicy targets. But it was also an early indication of how they roll. They have a real interesting playbook. They start by planting false information in the far-right media, like the Chernovich kind of Twitterverse of, that's the Pizzagate guy. I write in the book how I was the one person at the principal's table when the president twice asked his cabinet-level advisors for their views when he was making clear that he wanted to get congressional authorization before taking military action. I dissented. I said, I think we need to go ahead and do it. I turned out to be right about the politics. But I also acknowledged I think I was actually wrong about the policy, because Obama went on to negotiate the declaration of all of Syria's chemical weapons and the removal and destruction of 1,300 metric tons that are gone. We thought we got it all. Either we didn't, or they made new stuff. And so then Trump came in 17 and 18 and took Obama's target list off the shelf, quite literally, same list, bombed those targets, and then walked away 24 hours later and said, see, I did what Obama wouldn't do. But nothing has changed on the ground. Whatever chemical weapons were there are still there. And he did the same thing again in 18. And I actually supported those actions. But what it shows you is, it may make you feel good to bomb for 24 hours, 48 hours. But if it doesn't yield improvement on the ground in terms of getting the chemical weapons out or using the leverage of the use of force to force a diplomatic solution, you haven't accomplished anything. Which is, that we risk this generational damage to our experience and intellectual capital in our agencies as the workforce is aging in the first place, and then Trump is, doing his utmost to deconstruct the administrative state, or whatever he and Bannon called it. So I think it's rewarding work, it's important work, and I really encourage people to do it.
Join the deep state is what you're saying.
We should get T-shirts that say, join the deep state.
I just can't believe you took time off your other job of running the deep state to come here and talk to us tonight.
Well,
that's going to end up on Fox.
You have no idea what I'm doing from my basement in Washington, D.C.